When we think about India's struggle against the British, one massive event usually pops into everyone's head: the Great Revolt of 1857. It's often painted as this huge, dramatic start to the fight for freedom. But what if I told you that wasn't the beginning at all? What if it was actually the grand finale to a story that had already been raging for 100 years? Okay, let's get into it. So, the textbook story is that tensions just simmered and then, boom, everything exploded in 1857. But was it really that sudden? Was it just spontaneous combustion, or was it the inevitable end of a very, very long fuse? The reality is, the 1857 revolt was the final, massive blaze in a forest that had been on fire for a full century. Seriously, from 1757, as the British expanded, they were met with constant, fierce, and widespread resistance all over the subcontinent. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on that unseen prelude, the 100 years of fire that set the stage for 1857. So, what was fueling all of this resistance? Well, the main reason was the incredibly fast and often brutal changes the British forced onto India's economy, its laws, and especially its land revenue system. They didn't just conquer the place, they flipped Indian society completely on its head. And to get a sense of the pressure cooker that created, you just have to look at the money. This wasn't some small tax adjustment. In a place like Bengal, the British basically doubled what the Mughals had collected. Can you imagine the shockwave that sent through a society built on agriculture? And this wasn't a one-off. They did this pretty much everywhere they took over. And this disruption hit everybody. It wasn't just one group suffering. You had the traditional landowning elites, the zamindars and polygars, who lost their land, their status, everything. The peasants, meanwhile, were being crushed by impossible rents and debt. Local artisans, who were the heart of many economies, were basically put out of business by British trade policies. Even the scholars and priests lost their funding as the old elites disappeared. And bubbling under all of that was this shared, burning humiliation of being ruled by foreigners. And hey, don't just take my word for it. This quote is from a British official writing in 1859. He's openly admitting that the new colonial police were seen as a scourge, corrupt, oppressive, and a major reason people were so angry. When your own people are calling the system out like that, you know things are bad. So all this anger and chaos created two main streams of resistance. The first is what we now call civil rebellions, and these were usually led by the very people who had lost everything from the old world. We're talking deposed kings, local rulers, and powerful landlords. And let me be clear, this wasn't some isolated incident here or there. This timeline shows a constant, relentless stream of uprisings. For 100 years, you'd be hard-pressed to find a year where there wasn't an armed rebellion happening somewhere in India. From Bengal to Maharashtra, north to south, it was a constant drumbeat of defiance. Now, here's a really crucial point. These leaders weren't trying to create a new modern India. Not at all. They were traditionalists. They were fighting to turn back the clock and restore the world they had lost, the world where they were in charge. It was all about getting the old ways back. Okay, so that brings us to the second major stream of resistance. This was happening at the same time, but it had a completely different feel. These were the tribal uprisings. See, for centuries, tribal communities had lived pretty much on their own, in relative isolation. Colonial rule just shattered that peace. And to really get these uprisings, you have to know this one word: dikus. That was the tribal term for the outsiders, the moneylenders, the traders, the tax collectors, who just poured into their lands with the protection of the British. To the tribal people, these dikus were the face of everything that was going wrong. And what's really interesting is that these uprisings often followed a clear pattern. First, the dikos would come in and start exploiting people. Then you'd see spontaneous attacks by the tribal community to try and kick them out. After that, these incredible charismatic leaders would often emerge, messiah-like figures, promising that God was on their side. And that would inspire the entire community to rise up in a full-blown armed fight for their freedom. This table here really breaks down the difference perfectly. On one side, you have the civil rebellions, led by the old aristocracy fighting to get their status back. On the other, the tribal uprisings, led by these messianic figures, fighting to kick out all outsiders and save their entire way of life. Same enemy, but two very different fights. But here's the thing, no matter who was fighting or why, the reality of the fight was the same for everyone. It was a completely unequal struggle. This was never a battle of equals. It was a story of incredible human courage against just overwhelming, crushing force. I mean, just look at this comparison. It's not even a fair fight. The British had organized, drilled regiments with modern rifles and a central command structure. The rebels had, well, they had roving bands of fighters with axes, spears, and bows and arrows. The technology and organization gap was just immense. And sometimes, one single story can tell you more than any statistic. This account from the Santhal Rebellion. It's just staggering. Imagine it. 45 rebels, trapped in a mud hut, taking volley after volley of gunfire, refusing to surrender. And at the very end, one old man is left. And what does he do? He charges out and takes down an enemy soldier with his axe. That is the kind of fierce, desperate courage that defined this entire century of struggle. So, as you can probably guess, these rebellions were almost always crushed, and usually with horrifying brutality. But their defeat was not the end of the story. Not even close. They didn't just fade away. They left something powerful behind. And this right here is the key takeaway. Each individual uprising, yeah, it probably failed, but all of them together, they succeeded in something vital. They created these deep-rooted local traditions of resistance. They gave people heroes, stories, and a shared memory of defiance that later freedom fighters would draw on for inspiration. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Knowing about this 100 years of fire, this whole unseen prelude, how does that change the story of India's independence for you? It shows us that 1857 wasn't the spark that lit the fire. It was the massive explosion that came after the fire had already been burning for 100 years. It's a powerful reminder that so much of history is built on the struggles we've forgotten.